When a massive skyscraper collapses, there's usually this really long, drawn-out investigation afterward.
Oh, absolutely. Like months of engineers just sifting through the rubble.
Right. They are out there looking for, the exact microscopic stress fracture,
Hmm.
or maybe a bad batch of concrete.
Or just some minor mathematical error that caused the whole structure to come down.
Exactly. And the assumption is always that the collapse was a tragic accident, right? A failure of materials, something totally hidden from view.
Yeah, something nobody could have seen coming.
But imagine finding out that the collapse wasn't an accident at all. Imagine discovering that the building's lead architect had been standing right there in the lobby for 40 years.
Wow, 40 years.
Yeah, screaming through a megaphone that the foundation was entirely rotten. And the building management just kept turning up the smooth lobby music to drown him out.
I mean, that changes the entire nature of the disaster. It goes from this sad engineering tragedy to a story of willful, catastrophic arrogance.
It really does. And that skyscraper, for you listening today, is Jerusalem in the year 586 BCE.
Which is a heavy place to start.
It is. Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in the book of Jeremiah, which is this ancient text chronicling one of the most devastating societal collapses in human history.
And we really need to set the record straight on this one.
We do. Our mission today is to completely shatter the misconception you might have that this book is merely a 2.5 millennia old prophecy of unhinged doom and gloom.
Right, people just picture a guy weeping in the dust.
Exactly. But it is so much more than that. It is a profoundly deep, psychologically complex interpretation of a total national collapse.
And arguably, out of the ashes of that collapse, it births one of history's most enduring visions of hope.
Yeah, it really does. We're plunging straight into political intrigue, international espionage, and literal archaeological receipts dug out of the dirt.
Plus, a totally revolutionary theology of the human heart.
But before we get into all that, we should probably set a quick baseline for how we are going to navigate this world.
Yeah, that is a really good idea, especially considering the subject matter.
Right, because we are going to be exploring ancient streets filled with corrupt elites, social injustice, and political backstabbing. And honestly, a lot of it sounds strangely modern.
It really does, but we have to be clear that we are exploring a verified historical text and the ancient world it describes.
Exactly. We are noodly reporting on the text's claims regarding things like corrupt leadership and exploitative elites.
Right. We are examining the history and the theology on its own terms. We are not taking sides or pulling these ancient scrolls into today's modern political debates.
Definitely not. We are just here to explore the historical text exactly as the source presents it. So to really understand the book of Jeremiah, you have to start by feeling the intense, suffocating geopolitical chaos of the time.
Oh, it was an absolute pressure cooker. We are talking about the late 7th and early 6th centuries BCE.
A world completely on the brink of total war. So Jeremiah's ministry begins in the year 627 BCE. That is the 13th year of the reign of King Josiah in the tiny kingdom of Judah.
And it stretches all the way past the destruction of the city in 586 BCE.
Right, and for decades, the geopolitical tectonic plates of the ancient Near East were shifting violently. It created this massive power vacuum.
Yeah, because for centuries prior to this, the Assyrian Empire had been the undisputed, terrifying superpower of the known world.
And they were brutal, right?
Unbelievably brutal. They maintained their grip through sheer psychological warfare, flaying enemies, massive deportations, just horrific stuff.
But by the late 7th century, that whole Assyrian war machine was breaking down.
Exactly. Nineveh, their great capital, eventually falls, and whenever a monster like Assyria starts to die, every other nation scrambles to carve up the remains.
It is basically a geopolitical free-for-all.
Totally. So down in the south, you have Egypt, led by Pharaoh Necho II. He realizes this is his chance to march north and reclaim dominance over the vital trade routes of the Levant.
Okay, so Egypt is making a move.
Right. And then over in the east, you have the rise of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. They are rapidly consolidating power under this brilliant, ruthless military mind, Nebuchadnezzar II.
Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah.
Right, and stuck directly in the middle of this violent collision course between a resurgent Egypt and a rising Babylon is Judah.
Yeah, Judah is essentially a microscopic speed bump on the coastal highway between these massive empires.
A speed bump. That is such a vivid way to put it. So the kings of Judah are forced to navigate this impossible tightrope.
And initially, under King Josiah, there's actually a glimmer of hope.
Right. Josiah is pretty famous for initiating a major religious reform in 622 BCE.
Yes, because a lost scroll of the law is discovered in the temple. So he cleans house, tears down pagan altars, and centralizes worship.
But then absolute heartbreak strikes the nation in 609 BCE.
Yeah. Josiah makes a fatal geopolitical miscalculation.
What does he do?
He marches out to the valley of Megiddo to intercept the Egyptian army. The Egyptians are heading north to aid the remnants of Assyria, and Josiah tries to stop them.
Oh, wow. And he is killed in the battle, right?
He is, and his death doesn't just end a life, it completely shatters the psychological security of the nation.
I mean, I can imagine. The great reformer, the righteous king, cut down in his prime.
Exactly. And the nation is instantly thrown into vassalage. From that moment on, the kings of Judah are disastrously weak and corrupt.
The throne basically becomes a revolving door of puppet kings installed by foreign powers.
Yep. You have King Jehoiakim, who is heavily taxed by Egypt, and then later forced to submit to Babylon.
And he runs a really oppressive administration, right?
Whoa, totally luxury obsessed. He is building paneled palaces while his people starve, and he is violently anti-prophetic.
And then later you get King Zedekiah, who is the final king of Judah.
Right. And Zedekiah is characterized as paralyzingly weak. He is fearful of his own officials, terrified of the Babylonians, and constantly seeking backroom deals with Egypt.
So this wavering political maneuvering ultimately leads Judah to rebel against Babylon.
Which triggers a horrific siege in 597 BCE.
Right, that is the first deportation, where King Jehoiachin and the educated elite are deported to Babylon.
But the wild part is, the remaining leaders learn absolutely nothing from it.
They rebel again.
They do. And Nebuchadnezzar returns to finish the job. This leads to the complete destruction of Jerusalem and Solomon's temple in 586 BCE.
Okay, but the text makes a really vital argument here. Right, this wasn't just a failure of military strategy.
No, not at all. What is fascinating here is that the cultural and sociological climate inside Judah was rotting from the inside out.
The religious landscape was defined by profound syncretism.
Right. The people didn't suddenly become atheists. They simply hedged their bets.
They worshipped YHWH, the god of Israel, but they also worshipped Baal, the Canaanite storm god.
Because they believed Baal controlled the rain and the crops. They needed that agricultural security.
And they engaged in astral worship too, right? Bowing to the sun, moon, and stars?
Yes. But the darkest manifestation of this is in the Valley of Hinnom.
This is a ravine just outside the walls of Jerusalem. The text refers to a place there called Topheth.
Yeah, and this is where the Israelites engaged in actual child sacrifice.
Wait, literally offering their own children? That is so hard for a modern mind to even grasp.
It is horrifying. But during times of severe famine or siege, the desecration was so profound that they reverted to the most horrific ancient Canaanite rituals. They offered their own children in the fire to appease these foreign deities.
Wow. And this extreme religious corruption was perfectly mirrored by deep social rot, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The society operated on a strict honor-shame dynamic held together by kinship and patronage networks.
And the prophets specifically indict the elites of Jerusalem for weaponizing these networks against the vulnerable.
They were totally ignoring the widows, the orphans, and the immigrants. Corrupt judges were openly taking bribes.
Wealthy landowners were exploiting the poor.
Right. Because in Jeremiah's covenantal worldview, the violation of the society was just as much about economic exploitation as it was about bowing to a statue of Baal.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. When you look at Judah's frantic political maneuvering from the outside, it feels like watching a tiny tech startup.
A tech startup. I like where this is going.
Yeah, like a tiny tech startup trying to survive a hostile takeover between two massive corporate giants, Egypt and Babylon.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Right. And internally, this startup is dealing with a massive HR and ethical crisis. But they're just trying to keep the doors open.
Just trying to survive the quarter.
Exactly. So a modern pragmatist might look at King Zedekiah trying to make an alliance with Egypt and say, well, that's just basic political survival. You need a bigger army to fight Babylon.
Sure, from a purely geopolitical standpoint, it looks rational.
Right. So were they just trying to survive and Jeremiah is faulting them for basic political pragmatism?
Well, the theology of the text completely refuses to separate statecraft from covenant fidelity.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
To the kings of Judah, making a military pact with Egypt seemed like the only logical way to avoid annihilation. But to Jeremiah, turning to the military horses of Egypt for salvation instead of trusting in the sovereignty of YHWH was the ultimate spiritual betrayal.
So the political compromise is the core rebellion.
Exactly. You could not form a treaty with Egypt without also importing their gods, their social ethics, and their worldview.
Oh, I see.
Jeremiah doesn't see a pragmatic startup trying to survive.
Yeah.
He sees a covenantal partner committing adultery with foreign powers.
Wow. So their reliance on backroom political deals and foreign armies was the very proof that they had abandoned the moral and spiritual foundation of their nation.
Precisely. That dramatically reframes how we view the historical narrative.
It really does. It isn't a story of bad political strategy at all. It is a story of broken loyalty.
Now, a skeptical mind reading these ancient accounts of sieges, corrupt kings, and court intrigue might ask, how do we know any of this actually happened?
Right. Is this just a dramatic morality tale written centuries later?
But we don't just have to take the text's word for it. We can literally dig the evidence out of the dirt.
I love this part. The physical archaeological receipts from late Iron Age Judah, they give incredible, tangible texture to these events.
The soil of the Levant has yielded an astonishing array of artifacts that illuminate this exact crisis.
What kind of artifacts are we talking about?
We have inscriptions, clay seals, and broken pottery that drop us right into the final panicked days of the kingdom.
And the most haunting of these are the Luwish letters, right?
Oh, the Lotius letters are incredible. Let's paint the picture for our listeners.
So these are ostrucca, which are essentially broken pieces of pottery.
Right. Because in the ancient world, papyrus was expensive, so if a soldier or a scribe needed to write a quick message, they would pick up a pottery shard and write on it with carbon ink.
And a collection of these was found at the ruins of Lachish. That was a massive fortified city southwest of Jerusalem.
Yes, and they date to the exact climax of the Babylonian invasion.
So what do they actually say?
Well, today, you can go to the British Museum and look at Lachish Letter 4. It contains actual military correspondence between an outpost commander named Hoshea and his commanding officer.
And the ink on the pottery vividly describes the collapsing defense network.
It really does. The commander writes that they are watching for the fire signals from the city of Lachish, but they can no longer see the signals from the neighboring city of Azekah.
Oh, wow. That means Azekah has already fallen.
Exactly. And it perfectly matches the geography and the atmosphere of dread described in Jeremiah chapter 34.
Because that chapter explicitly mentions Lachish and Azekah as the last two fortified cities holding out against the Babylonians before they fall.
So you are basically reading the actual panicked text messages of doomed soldiers realizing the end has come.
That sends a chill down your spine, just reading a dying outpost's final check-in.
It is incredibly sobering.
Huh.
And then, digging in the city of David in Jerusalem, archaeologists uncovered something even more specific.
The gulai.
Yes, the bulle.
For you listening, a bulla is a lump of clay used to secure a rolled-up papyrus document.
Right. You tie a string around the scroll, press a wet lump of clay over the knot, and then stamp it with a personalized signet ring.
But the fascinating thing is that papyrus rots away over time.
Normally, yes. But when the Babylonians burned Jerusalem to the ground in 586 BCE, the intense heat of the fire actually baked these tiny clay seals hard as rocks.
Wait, the fire that destroyed the city actually preserved the clay.
Yeah, exactly. The heat turned it into literal stone, preserving them for 2.5 millennia.
That is wild. And when archaeologists carefully cleaned these tiny clay lumps, they found the names of specific government officials mentioned in the book of Jeremiah.
Two prominent discoveries bear the names Jehucal and Gedaliah.
And in the biblical text, specifically in chapters 37 and 38, these are the exact cabinet ministers who are violently opposing Jeremiah.
Yes. They are accusing him of treason and actively lobbying King Zedekiah to have the prophet executed.
So we are looking at the literal signatures of Jeremiah's political enemies.
Preserved by the very fire that Jeremiah predicted would destroy them.
That is profound irony right there. We also have the Ketef Hinnom silver scrolls, right?
Yes, found in a burial cave in Jerusalem.
These are two tiny rolled-up sheets of pure silver from the 7th or 6th century BCE.
And when conservators painstakingly unrolled them, they found them etched with the ancient Hebrew script.
What did they say?
They contain blessings very similar to the famous priestly blessing in the Book of Numbers. You know, the Lord bless you and keep you.
Oh, I know that one. So what does that tell us about the time period?
Well, those silver amulets illuminate the complex religious environment Jeremiah was preaching in. They show that the formal Orthodox language of the covenant was still actively being used.
Even worn as jewelry.
Exactly. Even while the society was plunging into systemic corruption and idol worship, it highlights the exact hypocrisy the prophet was attacking.
And if we look across the geopolitical divide, we also have the Babylonian Chronicle.
Yes, this is a dry, bureaucratic Mesopotamian clay tablet that records the military campaigns of Nebuchadnezzar,
It explicitly documents the siege and capture of Jerusalem in 597 BCE.
providing direct, independent corroboration of the biblical timeline from the perspective of the conquerors.
Now, I have to ask, if we dig up a modern mayor's wax seal, it proves the mayor existed, but it doesn't prove every word a local journalist wrote about them.
That is a very fair point.
So is that how we should view these like as contextual anchors rather than narrative proof? Finding a royal minister's clay seal doesn't automatically authenticate every theological claim the prophet made.
Right, exactly. These artifacts don't prove the Bible in a simplistic fundamentalist sense. Finding Jedaliah's signature doesn't mathematically prove that God spoke to Jeremiah.
Right.
But what these finds profoundly do is anchor the narrative in reality. They confirm the social, administrative, and military matrix of the late Iron Age.
They ground the prophet's struggle in a real, breathing, terrifying world.
And knowing the intense reality of this setting, we really have to look at how Jeremiah actually structured his message to dismantle the corruption of his day.
Okay, let's get into the blueprint of the judgment.
The entire massive anthology of the book is governed by a single programmatic commission given in the very first chapter.
Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 10. God tells the young prophet, "See, I have appointed you this day over the nations and over the kingdoms, to pluck up and to break down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant."
It is such a heavy commission, 4 verbs of absolute destruction,
Pluck up, break down, destroy, overthrow.
followed by 2 verbs of restoration, build and plant.
The destruction has to happen before the new foundation can be laid.
Right. And this commission is accompanied by intense visual metaphors. Jeremiah sees an almond tree.
Which teaches a really interesting Hebrew wordplay, doesn't it?
It does. The word for almond is shaked, which sounds like the word for watching, shocked. It symbolizes that God is actively watching over his word to bring it to pass.
And then he sees a boiling pot tilting ominously away from the north.
Yes. The geography of the Levant dictates that any major invasion from Mesopotamia, whether Assyrian or Babylonian, has to follow the Fertile Crescent up the Euphrates and then sweep down into Judah from the north.
Ah, so that boiling pot is the Babylonian army, ready to spill scalding destruction over the land.
Precisely. And the literary structure of the book itself perfectly mirrors this terrifying commission.
Let's break down that structure for the listener. Chapters 1 through 25 function as a massive, unrelenting covenant indictment against Judah.
Then chapters 26 through 45 shift into the brutal historical narrative of the siege, the fall, and the chaotic aftermath.
Right, chapters 46 through 51 zoom out to deliver global oracles against the surrounding nations.
And finally, chapter 52 serves as a historical appendix, confirming the fall of the city.
But the ultimate flashpoint of that early indictment section happens in chapter 7.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Famously known as the Temple Sermon.
This is the moment Jeremiah stands in the gates of the most sacred real estate on earth and basically paints a massive target on his own back.
Because the people of Judah were operating under this theology of cultic proximity.
Meaning they believed that because the physical temple of YHWH was located in their zip code, the city possessed a magical invincibility.
Yeah. They looked back to the days of King Hezekiah, a century earlier, when the Assyrian army mysteriously retreated from the walls of Jerusalem.
And they drew the completely wrong conclusion.
They thought God would never let his own house be destroyed, regardless of how the citizens behaved.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It feels like the people of Judah had what I'd call sacramental complacency.
Sacramental complacency.
Yeah, it's like someone buying an incredibly expensive gym membership. They exclusively eat junk food, they never exercise, they engage in incredibly destructive habits, but they feel healthy and superior simply because their name is on the gym's roster.
That is a perfect analogy.
They thought the temple was a magic shield, right?
Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Jeremiah absolutely shatters that illusion. He stands at the gate and points out that they are stealing, murdering, committing adultery, swearing falsely, offering sacrifices to Baal.
And then walking into the temple courtyard, wiping their mouths and saying, "We are safe."
Exactly. He asks them, has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your sight?
Wait, a den of robbers?
Yeah.
That exact phrase is quoted centuries later, right?
By Jesus, yes. When he clears the money changers from the temple.
That is an amazing connection. So Jeremiah is utterly dismantling the idea that formal institutional religion can coexist with profound moral rebellion.
Yes. And to fully understand his argument, you have to understand three foundational Hebrew concepts that anchor the
Let's
text.
lay them out for us.
The first is berit, which means covenant. The relationship between YHWH and Judah wasn't just a casual affiliation.
It was a legally binding suzerain vassal treaty.
Complete with stipulations and consequences laid out in the book of Deuteronomy, Judah has broken the berit, and God is filing a massive cosmic lawsuit against them.
And the demand God makes to settle this lawsuit is encapsulated in the word shove.
Yes, shove. It translates to return or turn back.
But this is not just a polite request for an apology, is it?
No, shove is not mere emotional regret. It is a 180-degree structural, covenantal reorientation.
Like, it requires dismantling the corrupt courts, tearing down the altars to Baal, and overhauling the entire economic system.
Exactly. But the people refuse to shove because they have completely abandoned the last two concepts, tzedek and tzedakah.
Which translate to righteousness and justice.
And these aren't just abstract ideas of personal piety. They are God's demand for systemic, enacted justice in the streets.
Meaning, without tzedek and tzedakah, without protecting the immigrant, feeding the orphan, and executing fair judgment, the temple is meaningless.
Right. The smoke rising from the temple altar is just pollution. The rituals are an offensive charade.
So you have a solitary prophet standing in the public square, telling a society driven by elite patronage and fragile honor that their religion is a farce.
And that their politics are treason.
And their beloved city is going to burn to the ground.
Delivering that kind of message in the ancient Near East isn't just unpopular, it's a death sentence.
The psychological weight of carrying that target on his back must have been staggering.
It was. The book gives us unprecedented, visceral access to the human drama and the prophet's internal breakdown.
We find this deeply personal anguish in sections known as the Confessions.
Located primarily in chapters 11, 15, and 20.
Because Jeremiah isn't a stoic, emotionless conduit for divine pronouncements. He is a fragile human being getting crushed by the weight of his calling.
In chapter 20, verses 7 through 18, we read one of the most severe laments in all of ancient literature.
He actually accuses God of deceiving and overpowering him, doesn't he?
He does. He says that the word of God has become a source of daily mockery and physical violence to him.
He even curses the day he was born and wishes he had died in his mother's womb.
It is a raw demonstration that faithful obedience to truth can feel like an utter, suffocating defeat.
And the burden wasn't just verbal. God forces Jeremiah into these bizarre, humiliating public performance art pieces.
The sign acts.
Yeah, the sign acts. He is commanded to physically embody the coming destruction. Like in chapter 13.
It's a linen waistband.
Right. He is told to buy a linen waistband, basically an undergarment, wear it, and then travel all the way to the Euphrates River to bury it in the rocks.
And then days later, he has to dig it up.
And it is rotting, foul-smelling, and completely useless.
It is a visceral, disgusting metaphor for how God had bound Judah to himself, but through their pride and idolatry, they had become rotten and useless.
And the physical metaphors escalate in intensity. In chapter 18, he visits a local potter's house.
He watches the potter shaping wet clay on the wheel. When the vessel gets ruined in the potter's hands, the potter simply crushes it down and reworks it into another shape.
The message there is pretty blunt. God has the sovereign right to mold or crush the nation based on how they respond to his hands.
But chapter 19 is where the imagery becomes really violent.
Oh, the broken jar at Topheth.
Yes. Jeremiah takes a hardened, finished clay jar down into the valley of Hinnom.
The very place where the child sacrifices occurred.
Right, and he smashes it against the rocks in front of the city elders. He declares that God will shatter the city and the people so completely that, unlike wet clay, they can never be repaired.
Wow. And the public spectacle reaches its peak in chapter 27, when Jeremiah actually builds a heavy wooden yoke.
The kind used to harness oxen for plow work.
Yeah, and he wears it around his own neck, chafing his shoulders, walking through the streets of Jerusalem.
Visibly demonstrating that Judah and the surrounding nations must submit their necks to the yoke of the king of Babylon or die.
You can imagine the absolute rage this provoked in the political leadership.
The conflict was constant and violent. The elite viewed him as a traitor who was just demoralizing the troops.
In chapter 36, we see the sheer arrogance of King Jehoiakim.
Because Jeremiah is barred from the temple, he dictates a scroll of his prophecies to his faithful scribe, Baruch.
And the scroll is taken and read to the king as he sits in his winter palace, warming himself by a fire burning in a brazier.
And as the columns of the scroll are read, Jehoiakim calmly takes a scribe's penknife, slices the sections off the scroll, and drops them into the fire.
Until the entire Word of God is burned to ash, he believes he can simply delete the terrifying truth by destroying the medium.
But God just tells Jeremiah to get another scroll, rewrite the whole thing, and add even more judgments to it.
The truth is indestructible, no matter how many books a tyrant burns.
And the persecution gets physically dangerous under the final king, Zedekiah.
Chapter 38. The military commanders decide they have had enough.
They take Jeremiah and lower him with ropes into a subterranean cistern.
For you listening, a cistern is shaped like a bottle, with a narrow neck and a wide, dark base used for storing water.
But there was no water in this one, only deep, sucking mud.
So Jeremiah sinks into the muck, left in the pitch black to die of starvation and exposure.
He is entirely abandoned by his own people.
But his rescue comes from a completely unexpected source, Ebed-Melech.
Yes, an Ethiopian official working in the king's house.
Ebed-Melech risks his own life by boldly approaching the king and begging for the prophet's release.
And he takes 30 men, finds some old rotting rags to pad the ropes so they don't tear Jeremiah's skin, and hauls him out of the mud.
The irony is so thick there. The foreign official demonstrates the courage and compassion that the Israelite leaders completely lack.
And amidst the physical torture in the mud, Jeremiah is fighting an ideological war against an entire industry of false prophets.
Right, he is not the only person claiming to speak for God.
The ultimate showdown happens in chapter 28 with a prominent prophet named Hananiah.
Hananiah approaches Jeremiah in the temple, physically grabs the wooden yoke off Jeremiah's neck, breaks it over his knee, and declares that God will break the yoke of Babylon within 2 years.
Hananiah is broadcasting a message of absolute, unyielding optimism.
He is weaponizing the word shalom, right?
Yes, shalom, which means peace, wholeness, and well-being. He and the other court prophets are running around the city crying, peace, peace, when the reality is that the Babylonian army is massing on the horizon.
The text explicitly labels this as shaker falsehood and deceit.
This raises an important question regarding leadership in a crisis.
I have to ask about this. Isn't it the job of leaders like King Zedekiah or the prophet Hananiah to project optimism during a terrifying siege to keep morale high?
Like a modern political strategist might say.
Yeah, a strategist would look at Hananiah and say, that guy is doing exactly what a leader should do. He is projecting confidence so the soldiers will man the walls. If you scream that everyone is going to die, the defense collapses. Why is projecting peace condemned so severely here?
Because projecting positive PR in the face of terminal reality is lethal.
Okay, how so?
It is like a doctor telling a patient with severe, untreated cancer that they look great and shouldn't worry about surgery. If you don't know you are sick, you won't endure the painful treatment required to save your life.
I see.
Hananiah's optimism wasn't harmless cheerleading, it was a potent anesthetic.
It kept the entire nation sleeping comfortably while the house burned down around them.
Exactly. By constantly reassuring the corrupt elites that God was on their side, the false prophets removed any urgency for the people to enact shove.
To radically repent and change their exploitative behaviors.
The refusal to listen and face the harsh truth guarantees their destruction.
And that destruction eventually arrives in full force. The false peace is violently shattered.
In the summer of 586 BCE, after a grueling, starvation-inducing siege, the Babylonian siege engines breached the walls of Jerusalem.
The great Temple of Solomon is looted and torched.
The city is leveled, the leadership is executed or blinded, and the surviving population is death-marched across the brutal desert into exile in Babylon.
The nightmare Jeremiah preached for 40 years becomes absolute reality. The psychological devastation of that moment is just unimaginable.
Everything that defined their identity, the land, the throne of David, the temple, is gone.
So the ultimate question is it over? Does the narrative end in the ashes of the destroyed city?
No, and that is where the profound theological pivot of the book occurs, shifting from the architecture of judgment to the hinge of hope.
Because the destruction is never the final word.
Remember the commission from chapter 1? God appointed him to pluck up and break down, but also to build and to plant.
And the building and planting begin in the darkest hour.
Back in chapter 25, Jeremiah established a strict boundary on the judgment. He prophesied that the Babylonian exile would last for 70 years.
That specific number is a theological lifeline. It means the exile has an expiration date.
It is a severe, devastating discipline, but it is bounded. Judgment is real, but not endless. God has not permanently abandoned the covenant.
We see this incredible shift in perspective in chapter 29, the famous letter to the exiles.
Jeremiah writes a letter from the ruins of Jerusalem to the traumatized refugees who have just arrived in Babylon.
And he tells them to build houses, plant gardens, take wives, and have children.
And most shockingly, he tells them to seek the welfare, the shalom, of the pagan city of Babylon, because in its welfare, they will find their own.
They are instructed to settle in for the long haul.
And it is within this letter that we find Jeremiah 29.1, arguably one of the most famous and frequently decontextualized verses in modern history.
For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope.
It is so easy to strip this verse out of the ancient world and read it as a personalized guarantee of immediate career success or financial prosperity.
But look at the staggering context. God is speaking to displaced, weeping refugees who have just lost everything.
Who are sitting by the rivers of Babylon under the thumb of a hostile empire.
He isn't promising them that they will win the lottery tomorrow. He is making a corporate historical promise to displaced people under judgment.
A promise that his redemptive plan for the covenant community is not dead, even though they are currently suffering the consequences of their own rebellion.
It is a promise of multi-generational survival. It is hope in the dark, which is infinitely more powerful than a sunny platitude.
And this hope reaches a towering crescendo in what scholars call the Book of Consolation, found in chapters 30 through 33.
It contains one of the most profound enacted parables of the entire narrative, chapter 32.
During the final desperate days of the siege, when the Babylonian ramps are pressing against the walls and real estate in Judah is literally worth less than the dirt it sits on,
God tells Jeremiah to do something completely absurd. He tells him to buy a field in his hometown of Anathoth from his cousin.
and Jeremiah actually does it.
He sits in the courtyard of the guard, weighs out 17 shekels of silver, signs the legal deed, has it witnessed, and seals the documents in clay jars so they will last a long time.
He is physically investing his own money into the impossible promise that houses and fields and vineyards shall again be bought in this land.
It is the ultimate display of putting his money where his mouth is.
Intertwined with this action is the promise in chapters 23 and 33 of a righteous branch that will spring up for David.
A future king who will finally, flawlessly execute the tzedek and tzedakah that the corrupt kings of Judah failed to deliver.
But the absolute doctrinal summit of the book, and arguably the theological climax of the entire Hebrew Bible, is the promise of the new covenant in Jeremiah 31.
Verses 31 through 34, God declares, "Behold, the days are coming when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts."
The law will be written on their hearts. The Hebrew word here is lev, which represents the inner center of human thought, will, and affection.
To fully grasp why this is so revolutionary, we have to understand the anthropology of Jeremiah, his devastating view of human nature.
Right. Earlier in the book, in chapter 17, verse 9, he writes, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it?"
Jeremiah strips away all illusions about human goodness. The people of Judah are morally diseased at their core.
So the problem with the Old Covenant made at Mount Sinai wasn't that the laws engraved on stone tablets were bad. The laws were perfect.
The problem was that the people possessed corrupt hearts that were fundamentally incapable of obeying external rules.
Which is why external laws failed. It is a profound shift from external demand to internal transformation. The new covenant is God's internal solution.
So what does this all mean for the people living through it? It sounds like an ultimate software upgrade.
Oh, I love that analogy. Explain that.
Well, the old operating system relied on external user manuals that everyone just ignored. The human hardware was corrupted. The new covenant is God saying, I'm hard-coding the software directly onto your internal drive, your heart. Is that a fair way to look at chapter 31?
It is a brilliant way to look at it.
Yeah.
He isn't just going to hand down a new set of rules. He is going to perform a total system overhaul. This new covenant fulfills the old one.
It doesn't replace it.
No, it fulfills it. The ultimate goal is identical. A holy people dwelling with a holy God. But the mechanism of salvation completely changes. God himself provides the internal power to obey.
He promises to forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more. Grace in this context is not moral indifference.
Exactly. It isn't God saying, I'll lower my standards because you are weak. It is the sheer divine power to heal the devastating covenant rupture from the inside out.
And this concept doesn't just sit in the ancient past. It becomes the theological bedrock of the New Testament.
Yes, there are massive Christological and redemptive historical links here.
When Jesus sits with his disciples at the Last Supper in the Gospel of Luke, He lifts the cup of wine and says, "This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood."
He is directly invoking Jeremiah 31. He is announcing that he is inaugurating the very reality that Jeremiah bled and suffered for centuries earlier.
And the writer of the book of Hebrews builds an entire argument for the superiority of Christ's sacrifice around a massive verbatim quotation of this exact passage.
Hebrews chapters 8 through 10. The new covenant is the unbreakable bridge connecting the ashes of Jerusalem to the ultimate redemption of humanity.
Having traversed the destruction, the weeping, and this incredible summit of hope, we have to look at the long shadow this book casts.
Right. How did this massive document actually come together, and what does its final form say about global justice?
The narrative sections conclude, but the book then shifts into a massive sequence known as the Oracles Against the Nations.
Spanning chapters 46 through 51.
Which is interesting because why devote so much space to foreign nations when the entire drama has been centered on Judah?
Because the text insists that YHWH is not a localized tribal deity whose jurisdiction ends at the borders of Judah.
Right.
He is the sovereign Lord over all human history. He issues devastating judgments against Egypt, Philistia, Moab, Ammon, Edom, and Damascus. Every nation is held to an absolute standard of moral accountability.
But the grand climax of these oracles is the judgment pronounced on Babylon itself.
Yes.
The same Babylon that God repeatedly refers to as his instrument of discipline. Nebuchadnezzar is even called God's servant.
And this reveals a deeply complex, staggering view of divine sovereignty. God uses Babylon as an instrument of judgment, but Babylon is not morally exempt from its own imperial violence and pride.
God can use an empire without approving of its ethos.
Exactly. Babylon was the hammer in God's hand, but they are held completely accountable for the atrocities they committed. They will be judged precisely for the arrogance of thinking their power was self-generated.
Following the doom of Babylon, the book seals itself with a final historical appendix in chapter 52.
Which heavily mirrors the end of the Book of 2 Kings. It recapitulates the fall of Jerusalem and seals the book with historical documentary closure.
It grounds the massive prophetic poetry in cold, hard, historical fact. The warnings were real.
And how this massive document actually came together is one of the most fascinating aspects of biblical scholarship.
It has an incredibly complex literary history. It is an anthology assembled over time.
We know that Baruch served as Jeremiah's scribe, and he was likely the primary compiler and literary organizer, preserving the oracles and narratives through the trauma of the exile.
But textual criticism reveals a stunning reality about the ancient manuscripts. When scholars examine the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in the caves of Qumran,
Right.
and when they look at the Septuagint, which is the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament,
They find major differences.
the Greek version reflects a Hebrew manuscript tradition that is roughly 1/8 shorter than the standard Hebrew Masoretic text.
Not only is it shorter, missing about 2,700 words, but the arrangement is different. The oracles against the nations are placed in the middle of the book rather than at the end.
Wait, so the fact that there are different editions, the Masoretic text versus the Septuagint, and that Baruch was expanding rewritten scrolls.
Yeah.
It means this book was living history. It's less like a solitary author publishing a finalized novel and more like an evolving, highly curated Wikipedia page maintained by dedicated scribes over decades of trauma.
That's a fascinating way to phrase it.
But does that change its authority?
What's fascinating here is that in ancient Near Eastern contexts, this editorial shaping is the prophetic process. Both editions are valuable.
So scribes didn't just passively copy letters?
No, under the guidance of the Spirit, they expanded and arranged the prophet's words to speak directly to the ongoing trauma of the exilic community.
The Word of God is indestructible, as seen when the scroll was burned and rewritten, and it expands to meet the community's needs.
It demonstrates an unyielding resilience.
Well, we have covered an immense expanse of history and theology today. For you listening, we started in the crumbling, terrified streets of a compromised nation, trapped in the crossfire of massive ancient superpowers.
We looked at the physical dirt, the lachish ostraka, the baked clay seals of corrupt officials.
We watched a solitary prophet stand in the gates of the temple, relentlessly dismantling a society that tried to use institutional religion as a magic shield.
While economically crushing the vulnerable, we witnessed the intense psychological toll this took on Jeremiah, pulling him down into the mud of the cistern.
We saw the lethal danger of false prophets who peddled cheap peace and positive PR, guaranteeing the collapse of the city.
But out of that absolute devastation, we found the hinge of redemptive history.
The breathtaking vision of the new covenant. God promising to write his law directly onto our hearts. This ancient scroll speaks with devastating clarity today to any society tempted to confuse cultural strength with divine favor, or to separate public morality from private faith.
It forces a severe honesty about the human condition, balanced by an equally severe confidence in the power of God to renew.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought derived straight from the climax of the book. The text reveals that God used the terrifying, violent empire of Babylon as an instrument to discipline his people. But then God turned around and judged Babylon for its own arrogance and cruelty. If the ultimate geopolitical superpower of the ancient world was merely an unwitting, temporary tool in a much larger divine narrative, how does that reframe the way you view the massive geopolitical or corporate empires dominating the globe today? Are they as permanent and unaccountable as they seem, or just temporary actors on a much older stage? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, and we will see you next time.